Our keynote speaker this morning, Bob Lee, joined Chrysler in 1978 as an engineer in training in the Chrysler Institute of Engineering program, and since held positions of responsibility in various areas of powertrain engineering. His experience included the design, development, calibration, and certification of more than a dozen major engine programs during his tenure at Chrysler. During this time, Bob led teams which earned 19 awards, 10 Best Engine Awards, including 7 for the Hemi, 3 for Pentastar, 2 for the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, and 1 for the 500E. Bob's most recent role was Vice President of Engines, Electrified Propulsion, and Advanced Powertrain Engineering at Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. Concurrently, Bob served as the head of Global Powertrain Coordination on the Group Executive Council, reporting to the CEO. The Group Executive Council was the highest executive decision-making body within FCA outside of its board of directors and was responsible for reviewing the operating performance of the businesses, setting performance targets, and making key strategic decisions for the group. Bob retired from FCA in May 2019 after more than 40 years. Presently, Bob serves on engineering advisory boards at Ohio State, Clemson, and Oakland University. He is a past board member at the Michigan Science Center and was appointed in 2021 to the board of Enidime Incorporated, a technology startup company from McMaster's University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Enidime focuses on developing next-generation switch reluctance motors, electric propulsion, and electrified powertrains. Recently, Bob joined the Advanced Energy Technologies External Advisory Council at the Argonne National Laboratory. Bob holds an MBA from Michigan State University, an MS in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Michigan, and a BS in Mechanical Engineering from The Ohio State University. Had to put that "the" in there, didn't you? Yeah, okay. Bob and his wife Jan live in Brighton, and they have 3 daughters. Please welcome today's keynote speaker and NCRO member, Bob Lee.
Yeah, that's the vodka. I heard that from someone. Guess so. Thank you, Mike. I've known you for many years, and I was a little bit worried about coming here. I thought I was going to be the butt of one of your jokes, and I can assure you this morning this joke was not about me. Just to be clear. So, good morning. Good morning to my former colleagues and friends, and to members of the Chrysler family that I haven't met before. It's an honor to be here and have a chance to share some of my experiences with you. As you said, 40 years is a long time, and it's not all going to fit in 30 minutes. So I've tried to give you a small snippet of a few things. I've entitled this presentation, as you've probably seen, as tales. And what I mean by tales are stories. They're stories because they're from my viewpoint, unfortunately or fortunately. Some of those may be stories that you know as well, and you may actually be more right than I am, but I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm going to call it a tale. If you want to come up after, or if you want to give a question or a comment, we'll do that in the Q&A. Secondly, I put et al. In the title, and et al. For me is all that stuff that came after Chrysler, some of which I acknowledge, and others like Cerberus I don't, so you won't hear any stories during that period of time. And thirdly, because I was a powertrain guy for my entire time in the company, except for the CIE a portion of that, I will tell you stories from powertrain. And because most of my projects, my first loves were engines, most of my examples today will be engines. So I apologize if you came here to hear about transmissions or electronics or transfer cases or any of that other stuff. I'm not really going to say anything about it today. So when I talked to my wife about doing this thing, because when you're retired, you get to see a lot of your wife, and I'm putting this thing together. She said, "What are you doing upstairs? What are you doing upstairs? What are you doing?" So I'm putting this talk together. It's gonna, I'm gonna get some old pictures and stuff. She said, "Well, the most important thing is to make it funny." I thought, okay. She said, "Why is that?" She said, "Because nobody wants to hear all that engineering crap you're going to talk about." So in an attempt to make it funny, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, and I'll show you a picture. So this is what I'm going to do today. It's not going to last 3 or 4 hours, as it might look like it's going to. I'm just going to give you a few snippets from front of some of these things, and then we'll move on. So here's the funny part. That's the funny part. If you saw this guy wandering on Highland Park in the late 70s looking lost, yep, that was me. And as you'll hear throughout my presentation, off and on, I'm still lost even after 20 or 30 years there. I was still lost, not necessarily not making the Highland Park story anymore. I was lost at CTC, but just lost in the process of how to navigate the labyrinth, right? You start in and you get into this environment. I grew up in Ohio, I'll tell you about that in a second. And it was just always a challenge to figure out where to go next. Well, should I, shouldn't I, blah, blah, blah. And so, 40 years of following the pathway that I thought was right, and sometimes it was, and some of you in the room know that some of those paths were not the right ways to go, but we're probably not going to talk about those today unless you bring them up. All right, so here's this guy. This is 30 minutes to talk about this guy. No, it's to talk about what I did and what we did, honestly. So in 1978, in June, I graduated from Ohio State. And as Mike said, it's now known as the Ohio State and University, so it's now the Ohio State University. And I accepted this job at this place called Chrysler in Detroit. And honestly, I didn't know much about Chrysler or Detroit. I had gone to the career services place on campus, looked through a whole bunch of companies to talk to, and this Chrysler was interesting. I liked cars and whatever, but honestly, I don't know. I'll read the brochure. So I read the brochure, and the brochure had this thing in it called the Chrysler Institute program. It was like, aha, this sounds fantastic. And for those of you who don't know what that was, I'll tell you in a few seconds, but that got me interested in coming up here. So I accepted this job with this company in Detroit, and I didn't know much about it. In fact, I'll tell you how much I didn't know about Detroit. I lived in this little town called Mansfield, Ohio, and that's like the armpit of Ohio if you've never been there. And I grew up there, and there were 2 AM radio stations from Detroit that we could get. One was WJR, of course, their 50,000 watt station or whatever. WJR, we could get that, and we could get this thing called CKLW. So I thought the old fart people listened to WJR, which I do now, but then it was the old fart people, and then CKLW. So what I didn't know about Detroit, right? So I listened to CKLW, they talk about Detroit Dragway, Sibley and Diggs, and all this stuff, and it was fantastic until I realized that, wait a minute, CKLW isn't even in the US. It's not only not in Detroit, it's not even in the US. That's how little I knew about the Detroit area and Michigan in general. So anyway, I accepted this job, and I started into the CIE program. And for those of you who don't know, the CIE program then's a little different than it was now. Than it is now. But then, it was 8 assignments. You got to rotate around in the company. Those assignments were 3 months long, and you got to go to school. It was fully paid for at a number of universities in the area. I chose U of M. And you got 2 days off a week to study. Or in my case, to wash my car, or put in a new camshaft, or install my stereo, or the only rule they had was no Monday and Friday study days. Other than that, 2 days off a week. It was fantastic. For 2 years, I studied. I rotated on the company. I had an executive sponsor named Bob Rary, who was the head of powertrain research, and it was fantastic. It was a wonderful experience. What could go wrong? Well, the financial pundits were right. Things got really seriously difficult in 1980. And so I had my degree, I got out of the CIE program, that was fantastic. Survived a number of rounds of layoffs, honestly, in that period of time. And then I found myself working for a gentleman, a great guy, his name was, we called him Reggie, his last name was Gresham. And he said, I can't protect you anymore. The next wave of stuff that comes through, I'm going to have to let you go. And it's like, gosh, thank you so much. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but thank you so much. And so the next wave comes through a few weeks later, and I find myself transferred to chassis. And I'm going to be the jack engineer. I was like, well, there's some exciting stuff. They're coming up with these things called sill jacks. The bumper jacks are going away, and the sill jacks are coming. And it's kind of exciting, but no, being a little bit impetuous and thinking I could do more than that, I said, there's got to be something better here. So over the Christmas break, I had talked to some people, and I actually got a law firm from some guys that used to work there. This guy named Chris Theodore and this guy named Steve Tweeter. They were working for a company called Legend Industries in Detroit, or in New York, sorry, no longer in Detroit. And they said, hey, you want to come work for us? We'll give you this job working on this turbocharged engine program. I was like, I don't know. How much money you got? So they made me an offer, and I said, no, that's not what I meant. I mean, how long is this going to last? I mean, it's a small company. Yeah. Well, we got enough money for like 18, maybe 24 months if nothing goes right, 18 or 24 months. And I looked at it, man, at Chrysler, I don't even know if I've got 18 hours, let alone 18 or 24 months. So after the first of the year, I came back, told my Jack boss that I was going on vacation for 2 weeks, went over to Legend, and they had an office here in Detroit at the time, or actually in Warren at the time. Took my stuff over there, and for 2 weeks I worked at Legend while I decided whether I wanted to go back to Chrysler or not. So in January, about I think the 15th or 16th, something like that, I walked in and said, thank you very much, Chrysler, I'm now resigning. And so I went to work for Legend. And so that got me to the next stage of this program here, what I call the working vacation. So I started working for this 50-person company, and I won't take a long time on this. We can talk for hours about it later if you'd like, but this company was in New York, and we had contracts at that point with John DeLorean for his vehicle to do a turbocharged version of it, and some contracts with, of all places, Fiat to do some turbocharged version of their Fiat Spider 2000. So the company had about 50 people, as I said. The turbo program on the Spider went reasonably well, and it went into production in, I think, 1981, if I'm not mistaken, at the port. And, I forgot to show you the offer letter. It was amazing to me. This was the offer letter that, and yeah, I probably shouldn't have put that up there, but that's what got me out of Chrysler was, believe it or not, 30 grand a year and guaranteed of a job for 18 or 24 months, something like that. So this is where I went, and this is what I was doing. This was Legend. This was the car that most of you know for other reasons other than that period of time. It became famous in the Back to the Future movies and kind of a cult following now. But Legend was different. Legend was like no place I'd ever been before. I'll show you in a little bit, there were a number of Chrysler people there, but you had to do everything yourself. It was like, I saw Jim Panashevitz here a few minutes ago. I'd go say, Jim, I got this casting problem when I was at Chrysler. It's like, I know about this and that, and get his advice, and he'd go, oh yeah, you should do that. It's like, okay, good, great. At Legend, there wasn't a Jim Panashevitz. In fact, there wasn't much of anybody. So the engineer got to do it all. And that's a learning experience and also a struggle experience, and I'll come back to that a little bit later in the presentation. I even found myself, for some of you who know where I started in the company in advanced engine design after the CIE program. Some of you know there was a huge drafting room on the third floor, 128, and a bunch of very knowledgeable and capable guys up there. But I actually found myself sitting at one of those drafting boards at Legend trying to figure out how to package some of this stuff in the DeLorean vehicle late at night, and I was like, God, where are those guys? They could do this in like 10 minutes, and I'm here after hours and hours. So Legend was me spending a lot of time learning that decisions can impact your life in many ways. This is a picture of the Legend engine on the dyno. We were responsible for pretty much everything that was glowing and a whole bunch of stuff inside you couldn't see. This engine was a Peugeot, Renault, Volvo consortium engine from back in those days. Not a particularly good engine. Difficult to turbocharge because the bores were, basically there were freestanding liners in there. Difficult. We didn't have a lot of stuff, like I said, at Legend, and so we didn't have a wind tunnel. So we used the Long Island Expressway and these little tufts of yarn, and we spent hours and hours and hours going faster than the speed limit and with video cameras trying to figure out why the air wouldn't go through those intercoolers like we wanted it to. And we changed the scoops and we did all kinds of stuff. But anyway, the engineer had to do everything, him or herself. So we got our stuff together. We came up to our ride and drive. Big event for us, getting the demo get a chance for the customer to show what the thing could do. In November of '81, we went out to Bridgehampton Raceway and had a demonstration day with the team of folks there. And these were the cars, and there were a couple of other competitive cars, half dozen Porsches and other things. And we had a pretty good crew of people evaluating whether the cars were good or not. If you know any of these people here, probably the guy on the right's your best chance, Chris Theodore, as he looked in those days. The next gentleman next to him is George Lacey. I never met him, but you may remember that he was a Chrysler exec before he retired and did other things like helping these guys. You obviously recognize John DeLorean. I think the guy behind him is Pat Bedard, but I'm not sure. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And the gentleman on the far left was a guy from Renault, as I recall, who wanted to come tell us we couldn't do that to his engine. So he was a little grumpy. So enough of the legend story except for this. This is a picture I took actually my wife took a couple weeks ago. We had a tour or a reunion of these folks after 40 years or so of not seeing each other. Everyone in this picture except the second gentleman from the left has some Chrysler background. And if you want to talk about it later, I'll come back and tell you who they are. Marty Haykamp's the second from the right. He's here, I know. And the guy second from the left, as I said, who isn't a Chrysler guy, actually went on to become president of Honda in the U.S. after many, many years of work through their engineering program, ran the racing program. Very, very smart guy. So anyway, enough of Legend Industries. Time to learn the craft back at Chrysler. So how'd I do that? How'd I get back? It's a long story, much too long for today, but basically, John DeLorean had his problems and went out of business. And then I had a problem because I was stuck in New York on Long Island with no automotive business to speak of. Fairchild Aircraft was there, they weren't too interested in me. And a number of other companies somehow didn't recognize my degrees from Midwestern universities. If I didn't go to Brown or I didn't go to Harvard, it was like, nah, we're not interested in you. So I was kind of lonely out there, and so I ended up getting a job offer from a place in upstate New York, in Rochester. Very famous place, used to make film, very big company. And I'll just say that the employment contract with them, they breached. And I ended up coming back to Chrysler after visiting. So another story for another chapter in the book if I write one someday. So what did I do? Learning the craft at Chrysler. I spent those years, and these years are kind of the years as I divide them. They're not necessarily the way the company would have. But so 8, 9 years of doing stuff, trying to learn the craft, trying to engineer things, trying to learn how the process worked, and trying to learn what maybe I might be good at, or at least what I wanted to do, even if I wasn't good at it. So this is the left-hand side is an exhaust manifold from the old 2.2 liter engine, and the right side is something we were working on to try to improve. This is another thing that didn't go into production. All right, so how about if we try another slide? Oh, no, okay, so can you go back one, just now I know where we are? Thank you. Okay, so there were lots of things during that 8 or 9 year period. I worked on all kinds of projects. And of course, Chrysler, as many of you know, didn't have a lot of money during that time. And so we designed a lot of things and didn't necessarily put a lot of things in production. But I did get a chance to work on the 3.5 liter engine that went into the LH cars during this period. It was brand new, 4-valve engine. Never had a chance to work on something like that. It was pretty exciting. And it was during that period, during what I call this learning period, that I got a chance to compete, I'll say, for a position in a program at MIT. And this program was something Chrysler was supporting at the top of the house, and they were very enthused about some of the books that had come out about the machine that changed the world. You may remember that book, or there was another one, I think, Made in America, I think was the name of the book. But it was all about the rise of lean processes and then Japanese philosophy, et cetera. And so they were sponsoring a program at MIT called the Leaders for Manufacturing. So they asked me if I was interested in competing for one of those positions. And there were 10 of us that were nominated to do that. So we set about and took the tests and qualified and whatever, and then we're going to select people to go, 2 people to go. And in 1990, things weren't great, so it got delayed. So what did the impetuous students do? Go to the next slide. I'll let you do it. Let's see. So the impetuous students, the 10 of us, I don't know what possessed us to do this. Like I said, I have a lot to learn. But we decided to write a letter to Bob Lutz. It was like, you're so wrong for not sending us in this program. It's not that much money. You really should be doing this. Blah, 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 blah. And honestly, I don't remember if we ever sent it or not. But a few months later, one person got to go. and I was number 2, and I didn't get to go. So anyway, I still had a lot to learn about how things worked in a large company. The good news out of all this was that they sent me to the MBA program at Michigan State, the executive program. So in '93, I graduated from that program, and if you can go to the next slide, maybe. I started some years at Proc, and Proc, as you may know, was Plymouth Road Office Complex. It was a place that, I guess it started as a Kelvinator factory. I went through a number of gyrations in the AMC world. And I got a job working at Proc because I applied to a posting. The posting system did work. I know there were many rumors during the years that it didn't work, but I applied for a position and got a job as the manager of engine design at Plymouth Road. So it was kind of a perfect storm because Plymouth Road, there was a program going on, which I didn't know much about, and then ultimately became the new Ram truck, or the new Dodge Ram truck at that time. Sort of the big rig look, as you remember. They were coming back into the world of trucks after having exited during the loan guarantee period before. Actually, they didn't exit. They said they were going to exit, so the market sort of went away from the trucks at that point, and no money was really put into trucks. So I think '94 was the year of the Ram, and why it was a perfect storm for me was there needed to be new powertrains. And here I am with my MBA degree. I'm going to see what else I don't know anything about. So I'm going to march in. And actually, it was a very good period of time. It was a fantastic place to work. And over a period of 10 years that I was there, we spent about $2 billion, and spent about almost 10 years with that $2 billion building 2 new plants, 2 new engine plants. 3 747 plants at Mack, and then also the plant in Saltillo, Mexico, to make a Hemi. So if we go on, maybe. So this was the appointment letter. Bruce was a great guy. He had come from manufacturing. He was my boss, so it was a very natural tie. I hadn't done nothing in manufacturing, and Bruce was a great mentor during that period. So you can go on, please. So lots of work there. The first new engine program, I mean, we had work to do on the 4-liter, obviously, to keep it up and deal with a lot of the things we could do in new models, whatever. But the real heart of the effort went into the 47 and 37 program. These were ground-up new engine programs. And some of you may have heard me say this before, but I always wished for a new engine program. I got tired of fixing all the problems in other ones. And so here's another kid thing, right? Be careful what you wish for, because when you get to do something totally new, what are the constraints? How do you know what to do? I spent months and months going around in circles going, oh my God, what are we going to do? I don't know. You can do anything you want. Oh, that's great. No. It was a terrible, terrible period for me to think that I had progressed in the company, thought I had understood how engines worked, but what do we do? So it was an interesting exercise in business and in technical things to be able to do this. So the 47 and 37 came out. It spawned an upgrade, a request for an upgrade, which we put out in 2008 for a high output version. And then thankfully, if you go to the next slide, Dale, there was lots of work on a 3-valve version. As you can probably remember, during these days, we had some friends in Europe that had 3-valve engines, and they thought they were pretty cool. And thankfully, we never put this thing in production, but we spent a fair amount of time looking at it and being able to prove we didn't want to put it in production. Okay, so let's go on. So the Daimler years. These are years that I know many of you think of Daimler and struggle with that, and I'll come back to a little bit later about that. But for me, this entire period of time was a tremendous learning experience and a chance to really try things in a very large global company. So if you go on. Probably no one is surprised that the Hemi has made my list of things to talk about today. It was a project that came really too early for me because the 47 and 37 were still being developed. We hadn't finished those programs. We were trying to build plants and get them running. And this engine, Rich Schaum came to me one day, or I actually probably went to him at his request, probably is the way it happened, but he said, we got to replace the 5.9. You know, it's just outclassed in the market. The trucks are here. we're just not able. We're going to have 47s and 37s. That's great, but we need a Hemi. And another clean sheet of paper. And as I said to Rich, are you sure? I mean, a huge gas engine in these time frames when people are asking about fuel economy and are you sure? Are you sure? He was right. He was right. I didn't know it, but he was right. And so we set about working on this thing. And the story here, some of this stuff you know for sure. Other pieces I'm going to share with you, I hope is new to you. So we all had our resources put on 37 and 47. And we were, what are we going to do? We got to get busy on this thing. What are we going to do? So if you go to the next slide. Oops. Can you go back? There we go. Can you go back one more? Oh, okay. We'll work with it. So what are we going to do? And the challenge was to put this thing together and launch it in 2002 for a 2003 time frame, or model year, sorry. And so we didn't have resources. We weren't sure how to get resources. And so I finally went to Rich and said, we're going to need to do something unique here to pull this off. So this was the paper that I took for approval of the program, which came, it's really, I guess the slides are out of order by one. But if you go to the next slide, hopefully, this is the paper I wrote. It was a few pages long. And I went to Rich and said, we need to put a facility off-site, and we need to have the best chance of us succeeding is to have the entire team off-site with all the capabilities and resources to be able to make this work. So what this was a proposal to go get a facility, lease a facility outside. And yes, I know CTC was just opening up, and the whole idea of Plymouth Road was fantastic. Why did we do this? Well, if you go to the next slide, hopefully, we wanted to put all these people in one place, and the place we found was in Auburn Hills. Not in Auburn Hills where CTC is, but 3 miles away. And if you just go to the next one, it's still there today. It's in a little industrial park off of Auburn Road. And about 50 or 60 of us spent years at that place. And we brought the engineers and the automation people from Mexico, because the plant was going to be in Mexico. We brought them up, we put them on site here. Everybody was co-located. We put the suppliers on site. We actually had people from multiple consultancies. We had AVL people in the building, we had Ricardo people in the building, all working as one group of people. And we ended up launching this program out of this building. Of course, the testing was done at Plymouth Road, but all in all, 60-some people, and rather unique off-site experience, which many of you probably didn't know about. Okay, what's that? Retron, yes, rear engine truck. So lots of work went on there, and that I won't take you through all the details of stuff we looked at, trying to make the Hemi. If you remember, maybe not, but the 5.9 was adequately outclassed in the field. It was probably 45 or 50 horsepower behind where the competition was, notably Ford. And this engine, we wanted to come out and beat that. We ultimately did, and as you may remember, it launched it. One of the taglines at the launch was 100 horsepower more than the 5.9 that it replaced. But the studies that we went into and worked on, the team did a great job. The one I want to highlight is the second from the right. There was almost a twin cam Hemi, not in an overhead cam configuration, but in the block. That configuration was very unique and would have been very beneficial. We were just having some trouble getting around some GM patents, and we came up with some very cool ways of making this an entire cartridge and inserting it into the center of the block. Unfortunately, or fortunately probably, the manufacturing guys that were there went through a lot of studies and said we'll never be able to hold the tolerances. You can design this, you can probably get them to work in the dyno, but they'll never be able to hold the tolerances in production. So unfortunately we had to avoid that or abandon that, and the 2-cam in-block Hemi never happened. Keep going. Here are a few people. We had some celebrations when it went into production. Next slide, we had some celebration with some bigger people. The guy on the right is Bill Wertman. Some of you may know he was the chief engineer that I worked under for many years. And the second from the right, for me, was very special because that's Bob Rary. He was the person who was my sponsor during the CIE program. And then, of course, there were some public awards. You already heard about those from Mike over the years. Next. So the good news about Hemi was it played very well to the press, it played very well in the market, and it gave us a base to expand. The two engines at the top, the 5.7 and the 6.1 at the upper left, those were designed actually.
Bob, a little louder if you could.
Okay, I'll try. The engines, okay.
Pete, grab the mic. Give it to it.
All right. Let's try this. Okay, very good. So the engines at the upper left were designed at the same time. The 5.7 and the 6.1 were thought of at the same time. As you well know, probably know, the MDS system, the some deactivation was parcel of it from the very beginning, even though we launched the engine without it. The good news about Hemi is that it spawned a whole bunch of other versions over the years. I won't take you through all these, you know them. But it's quite a history and quite a family over the years. The one that's not up here is, of course, the Hemi that we put into the hybrid program, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Next slide. You don't want to do that. That's engineering nerdy stuff. I should have taken it out. Next. So at the time, this was April of 19, there were more than 6 million Hemis built. I'm guessing at 400,000 or 500,000 a year. There are probably 8 million or something of them now. Next. So, got a chance. I saw Floyd here earlier. I was given a very good opportunity to be able to learn from Floyd for about 6 months or so as he planned his retirement. And in January of '04, I was given the chance to become the VP of Powertrain. Next, please. So, so as I was saying before, maybe have a word here. As I was saying before, the Daimler thing was not good for a lot of people, and I know that's, I know those stories, quite a few of them anyhow. But for me, it was a fantastic experience. I was given the chance, as I said, to replace Floyd. Well, not replace him, work in the same job for quite a few years to try to work up to that. But one of the things that happened was I became a member of the Powertrain Council with Daimler. And so there was a guy named Leo Mikulich and a guy named Volker Stauk. They were respectively engineering and manufacturing. And then on our side, on the Chrysler side, was myself and then Richard Chawa, who had manufacturing. So the four of us were given the opportunity to run powertrain for the Daimler Chrysler organization. So as I said, it was a good chance to learn, to get into plants, to meet people all over the world, and to interface with the upper levels of Daimler on a fairly regular basis. Next one, please. So what are some of the projects we did then? There are dozens and dozens, but I think a couple of them are noteworthy. One is the hybrid cooperation. Ultimately, it didn't go very far because of economic considerations. We'll get to that in a second. But this is a program that was really conceived by Tom Stevens at GM. He was very concerned about the hybridization activity, particularly from Toyota in Japan. But he didn't want them to have that head start and keep it forever. So his proposal was put together a consortium, or as we called it, a hybrid house, wherein DCX, Daimler, Chrysler, and GM would co-develop a hybrid system, or several hybrid systems as it turned out. If you go to the next slide, we would then ask to be able to bring in other companies and make that cooperation even larger. So there was a rear-wheel drive transmission to be used in trucks or large SUVs. The bottom left one is one to be used in the Mercedes vehicles, the C version, and then on the upper right is the front-wheel drive version. So this was to be the basis of many vehicles in GM, Chrysler, and ultimately we were able to attract BMW to the partnership. You may know about this program, but let me go to a couple of other details. Next, please. So it had its structure, which was very helpful for, it's very German, obviously, so there's a good structure here. And it really made for working relationships and getting a lot of things done, frankly, together. Next. I'll skip that one. It's just a lot of words. But you can imagine that how do you do this program? You've got secrets, you've got things that you don't want the other companies to know, but there are a lot of things you have to do together because otherwise, how can you have cooperation? So this was quite a tricky thing, and we ended up, if you go to the next page, putting people, again, in another off-site facility. This one, I'm not sure if you know, but was just north of the Oakland Mall in the industrial park that was there. We took over these, basically 4 buildings, a few of them were connected. And between '05 and '07, we ended up with about 400 plus people working on this hybrid program split between Daimler, Chrysler, GM, and BMW. Next slide. The most interesting thing for me about this entire program is that the merger of the structure between the organizations. So these, you probably can't read them here, but there's a controls group, there's an integration group, there's an NVH group, there's control system, blah, blah, blah. But all of those groups were actually commingled with people from all those companies. In some cases, we had BMW with the leader of a group, and Daimler people would report to him. In other cases, we had Chrysler people leading a group, and BMW or GM people would report to them. So it was actually a very integrated team, and it worked extremely well. And it went into production in '08, and as some of you know, unfortunately, the Newark, Delaware facility needed to be shut down during those bad times, and we kind of stopped building hybrid Aspens and Durangos. So very good program in my mind, but didn't benefit the company a lot. Another program was a DCXV engine program. If you go on, this was one that you may have heard about. Let's go to the next one, Dale, please. This was a way of trying to look for synergy between the Daimler and the Chrysler side. And of course, many of you were involved with those post-merger integration teams where we're trying to save money, and we had monthly reporting and lots of activity. This was a program that said, oh my gosh, we're all building V6s and V8 engines. Why don't we just figure out how to make one or two that we can share? Which sounded like a great idea until you realized that all the Daimler engines were 90-degree engines, and all the V6s at Chrysler were 60, well, except for the 3.7, which was sort of a orphan anyhow. And then the V8s, of course, were 90. So if you go to the next page, the work went on in '06, and then maybe, you're not going to be able to read these. But anyway, the bottom line here is that there were like 2+ million engines from the Chrysler side and like less than 1 million engines from the Daimler side. And we just couldn't figure out a way to get this together that we could actually make money. And if you remember in '06, things were kind of looking not so good for the relationship. And ultimately by mid-'07, Cerberus was around and Daimler wasn't. So this was a project, it was good, didn't work that great in production. I thought I'd throw this in. Some of you may have been part of these. It's not an engine program. This was part of the fun stuff my wife said maybe I should talk about. I don't know. But there was an initiative that to try to make money, or try to bring in cash, I guess, more than anything else. What can you do? What can you sell? That kind of thing. So this venture capital initiative was started, and it went on for a couple of years, I think. But I just want to highlight a couple of the things that Powertrain had. At this point, we were selling Viper engines, I think. I think we had started selling Viper engines. It's for boat applications to know more. But what else can we do to make money? So we came up with 3 ideas. One was an evaporative module that we had patents on. Another was, why don't we brand something with Hemi? Like, why don't we do an energy drink, a Hemi energy drink or something like that? And the third one, escapes me right at the moment, but if we go to the next slide, maybe it'll come back to me. Oh, marine engines, and not more marine engines by using the 5.7. So the whole system was set up. We put the business cases together, went out, talked to a lot of people. Got a lot of interest on putting 5.7s in boats. Turns out GM owned that business, and this was going to be a good chance to attack them. But ultimately, GM was big. We were hurting for money, and they weren't so much. So they lowered the prices, and we didn't sell any to them. And likewise, we went through the pitch, and our evaporative module was actually received quite well by a couple of OEMs, but unfortunately, we didn't turn it into a business soon enough to benefit. So we got a piece of paper that said thank you. That was good. Next. The early Fiat years. Let's go here for a few minutes. The first thing that happened in the early Fiat years is I was no longer a VP of powertrain. So that was like sad. Still have a job though, so that was good. I'm in the little green box up there at the left, reporting to Paulo Ferrero, and had a few things, diesel engines and engine design and some things there. And then down on the right side, you can't see this, but I still had advanced powertrain. So that's how things started for me, not great. And so I put my head down and we worked ourselves. Again, money was a problem, but we were able to find a couple of places with the US government where they were putting out things for bid. And this happened to be a DOE program, which was really interesting. I'm sure you heard at least some about this over the years, but if you go to the next page, this was a program to build plug-in hybrid vehicles. And some of us in engineering could see what was happening in the marketplace and wanted to get busy on this in terms of the technology, but we really didn't have any money. And fortunately, the government was willing to spend, I think it says someplace in here, I think it was a $59 million cost share, if I'm not mistaken. But it turned out to be a program where we were going to build 160 some vehicles and put them in service around the country for a couple of years. So this map reflects all of the places where, whether it was universities or with public utilities or with state governments, we built these vehicles, put them into fleets, and sent them out there as pickup trucks and minivans. And the only one on here that I had trouble defending after a time was, you can't see it, it's down in the left corner, but it was Hawaii. No one would believe that we were getting valuable data from Hawaii. And we had so many trips we had to make there. It was it was very hard. It was very hard to solve. But anyway, we did get some good data from Hawaii, as well as the other places. Dale, can you go on? So here are the vehicles. Nothing special that on the outside, at least. Next. Yeah, nobody cares. So, what else was going on? I was keeping my head down. We were finishing up the Phoenix program, which honestly, I'm so sad that it didn't get to use that name in production because this thing lived through so much. It started out as a synergy program with Mitsubishi and it grew into a whole bunch of activity trying to get the engine defined, and even during the Daimler days, some of that stuff I showed you before was the V8 mix, but was also, it was also a matter of trying to get something that others might be able to use. But ultimately the design finished itself up, I guess, through a whole bunch of heartaches, and we were able to produce this engine. As you may remember, what we pitched at the end was really the story throughout the program. If you go to the next slide. Maybe. This was truly a synergy program. These applications were all ours. During the program or time frame when we had platforms, vehicle platforms, the number of V6 engines proliferated. We had 2.7s that were in some front-wheel drive vehicles. We had the 3.5s and 4.0s that were in LHs. I guess the 4.0s and not in LH, but the 3.5s in LH. The 3.3 and 3.8s were in minivans, and this 3.7 thing was in the trucks. So this was an opportunity to get 7 V6 engines down into one family and then be able to get the synergy. You can't read the numbers at the bottom, but originally we had 189 major parts, and by the time I got done, we had 32. So it was a major savings, major
I'm gonna
synergy.
make a public service announcement.
Yes.
It ain't anything here, it ain't there, it's the room.
Or is it me?
No. You come through 5x5 on the piece out.
Okay, sorry.
No.
So anyway, we major success here. As you probably remember, we were launching 2 plants at the same time, almost the same time, Trenton South and Saltillo South. So this was a major undertaking, and I was still keeping my head down, which was a good thing. So next. Some benefits there, I'll skip this. So I thought I'd throw in a few things at the end to talk about the SM years, the Sergio Marchionne years, because many people want to know about that. And we'll go through this rather quickly and get to your questions. So for me, the good news was not yet. For Sergio came in '09, and the good news didn't come to me until '11. Back in August or maybe September of '11, I was in East 2000, and I was working on something, blah blah, with engine thing, some boring engine thing, and got a call apparently to one of the admins and came and got me. And she said, Sergio wants you to call him immediately. I was like, Sergio who? I had only talked to him a couple of times in my life. I didn't know his phone number. In fact, I didn't even know how to get his phone number. So she frantically ran around and figured out how to get to his office, and I called him back. And he called me back, and he said, I'm on an airplane. We're going to take off in a couple minutes. I just want to tell you that I'm making you responsible for head of powertrain coordination globally. Is that okay? I said, sure. He said, I got to go. That was it. That was the longest conversation I had with Sergio about what my job was going to be. The rest of the time, for the 8 years or so, 7 years that I worked for him, it was figure it out, which was like every time I saw him, I was not doing it right, and I had to figure it out. So anyway, this is what happened in September or so. This is what it looked like. I joined this group called the JEC, and responsible then for doing a number of things in addition to my job before. So next, please. This one hopefully will come up. Well, yeah, there we go. So the JEC was divided into the chief operating officers of the region, brand leaders, this so industrial team down here that I was part of, and then the support stuff and finance and whatever. So 22 people, and that was my other life. So I had an engineering life, and I had this life. Next, please. And then the engineering job got divided, which at first I was a little offended, honestly. I thought Sergio was wrong, but he said, it's too much work for you to run the NAFTA region powertrain and do all this other stuff. So I'm just going to give you the engine stuff, and we're going to hire someone else to do the transmission stuff. You're going to go hire somebody to do the transmission stuff. So I had a split responsibility. We worked on a number of programs, lots and lots of them, but I think this one's really important because hybrid activity, electrification activity was coming along still at a rapid pace, and we were still not making a lot of progress. We played in the water. You saw a few of those projects. And so we put together a proposal to make a hybrid version of the Pacifica that was coming. And there's a dispute today about how many times I got thrown out of the product committee. I think it was 6, and we got approved on the 7th. Some people think it was 5, we got approved on the 6th. But whatever it was, it took many, many, many months and thousands of pages to find a business case to be able to get into the electrification business. Because Sergio had many rules, but the first one was, we won't do it if it doesn't make money. And this thing didn't make money for a long time. In fact, we needed the help from the brand guys to be able to kind of reconfigure options and things to be able to make it at least nominally profitable for the company and nominally profitable for the dealers. Lots of components, things we hadn't done. Some of the stuff we had played with, as I showed you before, when we were part of the hybrid house, but we didn't have capability for doing all this stuff on our own, all at the same time. So it was a struggle. It was a challenge. Keep going. We won an award ultimately for it, and next, and next. And we actually got Sergio to come to the celebration, and he actually said he liked it. So that was, I think, a lie, but anyway, he came. One of the other projects we finished was one that he did support wholeheartedly. He called me in his office in 2013. I saw him like once a month, so whenever he wanted to, and then I saw him in all the meetings, which I'll come to in a second. But he called me in and said, we need new engines. I said, what do you mean new engines? What do you mean? He said, well, we're going to need new global engines. We got to do this. So okay, that's a lot of money. He said, yeah, and we want to make sure we do it right, so I want you to go out and hire 2 firms, the best 2 firms in the world, and I want them to be partners for what we're doing, and we're going to do engines globally. It's like, okay. And that spawned this Project Abe, which turned out to go to AVL, and the Project Jennifer, which turned out to go to FEV. And they were our partners for the next, 5 years, something like that, as we figured out how to design and build and manufacture engines globally for these engines that you might know. Let's go to the next one. So the strategy was this. We would end up with 2 engines without too many details here, with a common bore size, a common displacement, I'll say. And then we would build versions of those, 3, 4, 6 cylinders, as well as 3 and 4 cylinders, as well as ultimately the 6-cylinder. The small ones were known as GME, or GSE, sorry, the Global Small Engine, and the larger ones were known as Medium Engine, or GME. Next. Too much time here to go through, but it was a very hectic launch cadence. We started there in 2016, and just every month, literally, there was something going on someplace in the world as we introduced these engines. The one that came to the US first, you probably know, was the GME that was in the Alpha. Julia was actually done here in Auburn Hills by the team. And then some of the other engines, the GSE stuff, was primarily done in Europe and Brazil. Anyway, we can talk about that if you have questions. Next. One of the big things that was done was to figure out how to replace the 5.7. Everybody loved the 5.7. It was very profitable for us, very stable, had a great public image, but ultimately it was going to have to be replaced. So the idea was it would get replaced by something. There were tons and tons of studies done, and ultimately a 3-liter V6 was selected as the way to go. Now you may say 3-liter V6, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. I'll tell you in a second. Keep going. So this is what it looked like at the time. It was a TV6, a 3-liter TV6, turbocharged. Next. And then it led to a whole bunch of work. Well, that V6 doesn't fit in the Giulia, but there's a V6 that's in the Giulia, and there's something this. And so it was like the replay of the Mercedes deal all over again, right? This doesn't fit, but I want that. This doesn't fit, but you can have that. Blah, blah. So ultimately, we ended up having kind of a shootout, and almost a shootout of people too, but that's another story. At the end of the day, go to the next slide, please. We did some very strong comparisons and decided that an i6 was actually better than the V6 for cost reasons and for emissions capability. Not for the engine itself, but because of after-treatment packaging. So it was actually better for cost and after-treatment packaging. And ultimately, this is what you now know as Hurricane that just came out a few weeks ago here. So that's an i6. It doesn't look much like an i6 as you might have known them from years ago, but that's how we got here after more than 8 years or so of messing around and finally made it. So life with Sergio, what was it like? I won't go through this, but all those colored things are with Sergio someplace in the world. And every month it was somewhere, and it was on top of your regular work. Next. This was life with Sergio, except all the people aren't in there. This was a room in Lagotto. It's the office building in Turin. You're sitting behind Sergio's seat, and you probably can't see in the picture very well, but the guy on the left at the front is Mike Manley, and behind him is Joe Veltri on the left, and then Davide Mele's on the right. This was a room where we might spend 3 days in for our meetings, product meetings or JEC meetings. So life with Sergio. Next. Oh, and the one thing you can't see for sure, you can't read the sign at the top. That little dot matrix thing at the top says December 23rd. So if you're wondering what we were doing before Christmas, that's what we were doing. The reason I put this up is many of us had the privilege and the displeasure of traveling on this thing. Privilege because it was fast. Privilege because it went from door to door. Displeasure because if you've been in an aluminum tube for 8 or 10 hours with your boss and can't get away, it's not great sometimes. Next. In fact, you can try to sleep. Sorry, Mr. Chernobyl, but yeah, got you there snoozing a little bit. Next. And sometimes you took helicopters. This was on the way to Ferrari. Once again, it sounds fantastic, but traveling with the boss can be a little painful. Next. This was outside one of our meetings. The great thing about going to the Boloco track was, for these JEC meetings, was you're there for 2 or 3 days. But the really great thing was that our breaks were all free to use the facility with all the cars that were parked outside, except one, and I'll show you that one in a second. But that's the one I'm going to show you. That's Sergio's Enzo, which rumor has it he was given when he found the put option with GM that allowed Fiat to continue. Go ahead. Next. And this is the induction of the Giulio program in Italy. What's next? And this was trying to stay awake in Shanghai for the Grand Prix F1 race a few years ago. And this is the best part of the whole thing of working with that team is the food. The food in Italy was fantastic. You can't see much of the food here, but it was fantastic. Next. Okay, so finally this is the end of the tales. So taking you through a little bit of the labyrinth, a little bit of the story, and there's so much more. And we could talk, and maybe we will for a few minutes here, but for me it was just amazing to be able to have that chance. Sergio did a lot of things for a lot of people, including me. He provided opportunities for me to try things I never would have tried on my own, and he also provided opportunities for me to learn about all the things I didn't do right when I was doing that. It was wonderful coaching. It was also painful and frankly sometimes a little bit lonely. But anyway, I'll cherish the journey. I had a great time doing it. Hopefully you got a few glimpses into my past. And I think with what Stellantis is doing today, there's still a spirit there to keep trying things that are different and to pushing the boundaries. And I think that's one of the things that made us successful for the number of years I was with the company. So with that, I'll end the tales and see if you have any questions I might be able to answer. Why don't you just skip to the end, Dan? There you go. Let's leave it with Ms. Marchionne. I can use this. Do you want that? All right. Okay, so sorry about that. It's a little long. As I said, I had a hard time figuring out what to cut out and what to put in. So.
Any questions? Is that on? Can you hear me?
No.
Hello? Okay, do we have any questions?
All right. No one wants to go on
No,
that.
there's one.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing you said you didn't want to talk about was some of the Cerberus years, and I always wondered, during the Cerberus years, we brought the media and had them drive electric versions of a lot of our cars around CTC. And I know there were big arguments internally that, this was smoke and mirrors. So my question is, what were the smoke and mirrors? Because nothing ever happened with it. We brought the media in and had to drive electric cars around CTC.
Yeah. Well, it was smoke and mirrors. Those weren't our cars. They were things that had been contracted as demos, honestly. And they weren't streetable cars. They weren't manufacturable cars. They were idea cars, which was good, but they weren't real. The one that got the most time was actually a Lotus vehicle that had been modified somewhat. So, is that before the firing squad? So yeah, it was called Envy, the program, and the group was called Envy, and I think they did a good job of quickly getting to something that would attract attention and potentially investment. As you recall, there was an attempt to spin off that activity and actually turn it into something that would generate cash, but it really wasn't a product. It wasn't even an S0 or I forget what other nomenclatures we would have used, but it was a mule. Those were mule vehicles. Yeah. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Pass the microphone, Bob.
No,
Just
the
curious.
women aren't here
It's coming.
Go
It's
ahead,
coming. Pete's coming.
There you go.
He's gonna jump across the table.
Hey Bob, thanks for the presentation. Question is, your thoughts, opinions on statements we hear from the industry regarding totally electric, 100% electric by 2035?
May I have another hour, please?
We'll set you up in the parking lot.
Yeah. This is an enormously complicated problem, right? There's the physics problems, there are the business problems associated with supply of materials, and there's a huge problem of customer acceptance. Those are like three major categories, and they're not, none of them are easy. They all have counterpoints to every point that I'll bring up here, but let me say some things that are factual. What I believe are, I
What's wrong with electric vehicles?
So the problem is the battery. No,
It's not any of the mics.
no, I don't know. So
How's your minister voice?
I'll just shout. So this is a complicated problem. Three major areas for me that I mentioned, but the challenge, the biggest challenge from a technical standpoint, is engineering something that is cost effective. Can it be done? Sure. Is it cost effective? Right. That's a challenge. The supply issue is real and super complicated. There are geopolitical issues associated with cobalt and lithium, for sure, and nickel as it grows. There are issues associated with who can corner that market to even be able to use it in your designs, because you have to design to the details of what you can get, not the other way around. You just don't go buy something and see how it works. And if you can't get anything, you can't do anything at all, obviously. So that whole supply thing is a mess. And then the customer acceptance piece is unbelievable. Yeah. It works when you throw it on the table.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
maybe not.
All right, it's my Fitbit, I don't know the problem. So then the issue of customer acceptance. EVs are wonderful. I don't know how much time you've spent in one. They're fantastic, they're quiet, they're powerful, but they have a huge number of downsides. And the downsides are associated with cost. They're associated with where can you charge this thing. A lot of people don't have the ability to charge. But the biggest overwhelming part for me is, why are we doing this? If we're doing it for air quality, if we are, then we should be maximizing the air quality benefit for the amount of rare products that go into that vehicle. So if someone buys a Tesla with a 120 kilowatt hour battery in it and uses it to go back and forth to work, it'll work. It's great. They'll love it. They're not going to have charge problems. It'll be fine. But they just hogged enough lithium and cobalt in their purchase. We could have built 10, 12, 14 hybrids or plug-in hybrid vehicles that would have delivered a lot more benefits to the air quality and a lot fewer disruptions to the, I'll say, the landscape and the earth of getting those materials out. Not to mention all the geopolitical stuff and whatever. So to me, this issue is, what are we trying to do? Trying to make fun cars to drive? That's fantastic. Trying to improve air quality? Depends on where the electricity comes from, but hybrids and plug-in hybrids are a lot better choices from a facts and physics standpoint. I don't know if that answers your question, but it gave me a chance to use my preacher voice. Is that what you said?
There you go.
Okay.
We have one over here, I think, Bob.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
All right, we'll try.
Years ago, we had our fuel cell program, of course, that went to Daimler. And at that point in time, that was talked about the future as opposed to EV. So where does that stand right now, in your opinion?
Fuel cells are, you know the joke in the fuel cell community probably. Fuel cells are 10 years away, and every 10 years they're 10 years away. They're just, they get better, they find some applications, but they're complicated devices. They've solved many of the problems now. You can actually start them when they're cold. But there are two problems. There's one big problem, and there's a second one that's a little bit less so. But the big problem is, where do you get the hydrogen? And the hydrogen can be made many ways, but it takes energy to do that. If you're in a place where you luckily have hydropower, you can make hydrogen fairly inexpensively. You can make it from using electricity and natural gas or methanol. I mean, there are lots, but the energy intensity of making hydrogen, which is not a very dense material from a transport standpoint. So you end up making this thing, and it works, and it's, quote, zero emissions. That's great, but you can't store much of it, and you've wasted a lot of energy getting to that point. So to me, hydrogen has limited application, except in places where packaging doesn't have a constraint or not much one, like over-the-road trucks, things where shipping, things where you can generate appropriate storage and not impact the mission of the vehicle. For example, it would make no sense to take a Fiat 500 and say, I'm going to make a fuel cell, when the fuel tank needs to be half the size of the car. So what's the alternative? Oh, let's make the car bigger so we can have a hydrogen tank. That doesn't make any sense, right? So and it's just not there yet. And I don't think it's a good choice, honestly, for automotive type transport.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
All right. The mic worked for the last question. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. I think, Rich, you wanted to say one thing though, right? Just remember, if you want to stick around for the Medicare seminar, I think you could start in a few minutes. Give us a chance for a rest time. But Bob, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. Be safe, and we'll see you in February for sure.